celebrarlo.
Utilize this period as a time to demystify Columbus.
The 500th anniversary is genocide, racism, bigotry, hatred.
We have something to contribute to this country.
We don't want your pity. We want your support because we need your help because we cannot continue another 500 years of these genocidal policies.
Christopher Columbus is the one who contributed to the extinction equation. The extinction of cultures going as fast as the extinction of plants and animals.
The Black Hills is our sacred ground where we bury our dead. And Bear Butte is a place where we go seek vision or a dream. And I believe when the white people take their machineries there, it's progress, destruction, and exploitation. It seems like there is no privacy to be the whole being with the nature. Seems like there is no more privacy in what we are seeking. You know, Mother Earth is not the enemy. You know, the enemy is, human being. So we are the keepers of this island. We are not the owners.
When the first Europeans landed on the shores of North America, they were fleeing from religious and political persecution. They brought with them their languages and their religious faiths to their new world. The people they called Indians had already been living here for more than 30,000 years. For the Indians, this land was very much an old world, rich with tradition. Indian culture, then and now, is based on the belief that humans and all creations of God are related and should live together in harmony. This philosophy extends to the earth itself and to its mountains, lakes, and rivers. They are considered by many Indian people as sacred places. Frank Foolscrow is a well-respected medicine man of the Sioux Nation. He speaks of a time when Indian people buried their dead and prayed directly to Wakantanka, the Great Spirit in the sacred hills, a time when daily life reflected their communion with God. These young men are running around these sacred mountains to honor an ancient Indian legend. According to this legend, when these hills in the Plain States were formed, Indians and animals of every kind ran around them in celebration, running so hard that they died. The legend also said that their spilled blood stained the earth, making the clay red. This clay path, known as Sacred Hoop, circles through North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Montana.
This country is a temple of God and a tabernacle of the Indian people. And the natural laws they studied, the sun and the moon and the stars, the water and the air and Mother Earth. They found God's power and they lived by that power when the white man come. God and the Indian people built their religion through fasting and dreams. And now God appeared unto them and teach them how, what to do, and so forth. So together they build the Indian religion that we still use today. We call it Sundance, and the spiritual ceremonies. We talk with the deceased, and we talk with God in our dreams.
For the Indian people, the land and traditional way of life, their religion and the universe are inseparable. The Sundance is one of the most sacred rites of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and other tribes. It is performed each year, lasting 4 days and nights. Participants fast and pray for brotherhood and respect for all things during this time-honored ceremony. Before the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1978, many such Indian religious practices were prohibited. With this new federal law, the Indian people were guaranteed for the first time their constitutional right to practice their religion and have access to their religious sites. Bear Butte and the Black Hills in southwestern South Dakota are two of the areas considered most sacred. This is where Indian law is said to have been passed down directly from God to the various tribes. Spiritual and tribal leaders are buried on these sites, which are believed to be the home of ancestor spirits. During the 1850s and 60s, the United States government signed treaties with the Northern Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho nations at Fort Laramie, Wyoming. These agreements recognize approximately 50 million acres as Indian lands. The treaties were not a surrender, but rather peacekeeping documents, which said that these lands were for the Indian people to occupy and live on. But in 1877, only 9 years after the last treaty had been signed, there was a gold rush into the Black Hills. The federal government then broke the treaties and began confiscating the Black Hills and surrounding territories to allow miners and settlers into these areas. Ever since, the Indian people have been trying to regain possession of these lands and holy places.
There's 11 different bands among the Sioux Nation. They all use Bear Butte. They use it for religious purposes. And also the Reeds and the Mandans and the Arapahos and the Cheyennes and the Nez Perce. This is an Indian country, religious country. We live under God's law, natural law, supernatural law, spiritual law. He had placed us upon this island to enforce those laws, and we did. You can't make enough law to take it. Your law don't mean anything to us. You made those laws yourself.
This time the Sioux have united and they formed a committee to develop legislation and to take that legislation to Congress, to take the issues to the American people. We're asking the United States to do what it can do to return the federal lands in the Black Hills. Historically, The title to the Black Hills was recognized by the United States through a treaty that was negotiated between the Sioux tribes and the United States in 1868. It was territory that was set aside for the absolute and undisturbed use of the Sioux. The United States tried to negotiate with the Sioux to cede the Black Hills to the United States. The Sioux refused. After Custer was wiped out on the Little Bighorn, there was backlash in Congress, and the politics was such that it was relatively easy to get Congress to just go ahead and pass a bill that abrogated the treaty and took the Black Hills, and that was done in 1877. So for 106 years now, the Sioux have been trying to get the Black Hills back. We've tried in the courts. A claim was awarded. The United States, in effect, said that the Black Hills was worth $17 million. Beyond that, you are entitled to interest. So $105 million was appropriated. That money is still sitting in Washington. The Sioux tribes are rejecting that claim. They're saying, we don't want the money, we want the land. There's another title that we have to the Black Hills, which the white man has very great difficulty in grasping, and that's the spiritual title. And it's this spiritual title that has sustained the Sioux over the last 106 years.
In April 1981, Matthew King and about 30 Dakota American Indian Movement members occupied the Victoria Lake area in the Black Hills. They named it Yellow Thunder Camp and established it as a spiritual and educational center. Their purpose was to test the limits of both the Fort Laramie Treaties and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act.
So I took that 800 acres as a testing case. We want to test what the government is going to do. 1 year they never bothered us. And then they saw their mistake. So they accused him of everything they could think of. It's really comical. Makes you laugh, you know. And that white man sitting there with his sober face, lying and cheating, you know. I don't believe that. Sometime I'll talk with them. I'll watch them. They know they're lying. You can know. Makes you laugh. They blame everything on us. All the time he was doing the same thing to the Black Hills proper, cutting the trees and destroying trees, destroying the beauty of the hills and all that. And when the Indians cut a few poles to build their arbor and pray, he said they didn't have permission to pray. You ever hear anything like that? You don't have to have permission to pray to the Great Spirit. Every man has an equal right and has a right to pray to God. He's God anytime he wants to. Nobody isn't going to rule you. Nobody isn't going to stop you. It's impossible. That's Indian religion. The Yellow Thunder Camp is a spiritual camp. And the people who live in there have to go according to the spiritual law, laws of nature and natural law, to survive, and that's what they're doing.
This place has really helped me spiritually. You know, I used to drink and smoke pot and do all those things that you do on a reservation, you know. And I needed something, you know, to help me. So one night I went to sleep and I had a dream that my ancestors were standing in front of me. He said, go to Yellow Thunder Camp. I said, they'll help you. And I looked around and saw the beauty of this place, and I felt the power and I felt the spirit's present. And I realized this is the place. This is where I belong, you know. That power is here and we all feel it. That's why we're here. The power of the spirits, power of the trees, the rocks, the animals, the eagles. And many times I've seen them around here. Many times they've touched me. You can feel the power. Here when you pray, if you're really sincere about what you're praying about, your prayers will be answered, you know. It's here that we share what we know with other people, and they share in turn with us. We realize that this is something that we have to hold on to for our unborn generations, for our children, for the elders. A place to relearn what our ancestors have learned long ago, things that they've experienced, the feelings that they felt. We feel those same feelings here.
It's very hard for an Indian to break their vows, you know, the treaties. They make it under God, and they're not going to betray God. So they just hang on and feel that the white man will learn and will do what is right. They never did. They're still the stubborn, the childish way of thinking. They're very childish. They say one thing and next minute they change it. They don't know what is right and what is wrong.
In our language, the Black Hills is called Chesapa. It's a dark wooded area, is what it essentially means. And the area surrounding it is called the Changleska, and that means the sacred hoop. So we had a center of our lifestyle, and we had a sacred hoop surrounding the land base that we consider sacred. Now we are restricted to being on the outside of that, or on the perimeters of that sacred area. It's not simply a sacred area and left at that. There are reasons for its spirituality. It's rich with legend. There is Harney Peak. Black Elk referred to it as the center of the universe. In our language, it's called the Makochikile Chokata. It's the center of our lands. It's the highest point in the Black Hills. It was a place of pilgrimage. Strong people like Black Elk used to go there and pray for the nation. There are other places in the Black Hills, the Iyan Owapi. Nowadays it's called the Red Lodge Canyon. It's a place where there are petroglyphs, there are rock writings in the canyon walls. There's a place that has the constellations, has altar places. The old folks tell me that within the rock writings are the 7 commandments for Indian people. There are 7 commandments that we live by. There are 7 ceremonies associated with the sacred pipe. Some people call them the 7 rites of the pipe. I don't know what the anthropologists have to say about it. I don't know what tourists have to say about it, whether they understand our rock writing, but it's there. Right now, they call it Hot Springs. There's even a city there called Hot Springs. We call it Mini Hawoblu Makoche. It was a place the medicine men used to go to, our spiritual leaders used to go to. They used to bathe there. They used to gather there. They used to talk to each other and say, this is my gift that I learned from this herb. This is what the healing powers of this herb are. They would share information back and forth. Right now, if we were to go up to Hot Springs, you'd see some big swimming pool there called Hot Springs. And people have commercialized, you have to pay $1.50 to get in and swim. It's kind of lost its spiritual appeal. But in the understanding of the old folks, they understood that our spiritual leaders needed a place to gather and share their information. They needed their own retreat to go and purify themselves and share their knowledge with each other. I met this elder by the name of Louis Badund, who's head man of the Lakota Treaty Council. And he told me the history of the Black Hills and the long, drawn-out struggles of the Lakota people in trying to get the federal government to understand that the land still belonged to the Indian people, to the Lakota people. He told me that his forefathers had the treaty in their hands that assured us that the Black Hills were ours. The 1868 treaty guaranteed the lands to us. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills, the advent of homesteaders, military installations, tourists, municipalities, all of that have since come into the Black Hills area. And people have more or less ignored us to death. And he told me some sad stories about Indian people traveling to Washington, D.C. with this treaty in their hands, asking for some type of pledge, some type of guarantee that these promises would be fulfilled. A lot of those people have since lived and died with this treaty in their hands. I have since inherited that position. Now I am carrying the document in my hands. If I am unsuccessful, one of my children is going to inherit this document, and they're going to carry it forward. This country will never forget its history as long as there are Lakota people alive.
Bear Butte is a place where the Lakota people received their original instructions from the Creator, in other words, their 10 Commandments. So every year, Lakota worshipers go to Bear Butte on the vision quest for the purpose of coming into direct communication with the spiritual world of our people. So it's very important that there be solitude. In recent years, people that go up there have not been able to successfully complete the ceremony. For example, tourists now go to the Butte on hiking expeditions, and they come into direct contact with these people who are attempting to complete their vision quest. They talk to them, they photograph them, and many times even take religious offerings off the Butte. And this way are interfering with very important religious ceremony. Recently, the state of South Dakota and the State Department of Game, Fish, and Parks sent a letter to traditional Sioux and Cheyenne leaders as well, informing them that they could not use Bear Butte for religious activities. The reason for this is that in 1962, the state purchased a portion of the Butte and converted it to a state park. And so they were planning to build permanent structures. And to allow them to do this, they informed the traditional leaders to stay away until the construction project was completed. But this was very insensitive in that May is one of the very most important months for the religions of both the Sioux and Cheyenne. As a result of this letter, the traditional people were denied complete access to this important religious shrine. And so we filed a suit in the United States District Court in Rapid City, South Dakota. And we claimed that the Butte was being desecrated by the building of these permanent structures. We claimed that our people were being denied religious access to the Butte, and that the increase in tourism was interfering with these important religious ceremonies. And so the United States District Court ruled that what the state was doing was not interfering with our religious rights under the First Amendment and under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. We are now in a process of appealing to the United States Supreme Court. The district court was looking at this case as part of the overall Black Hills claim, rather than looking at it from a purely religious perspective. So even though the U.S. Congress has passed the Indian Religious Freedom Act, we have First Amendment rights, we find in the legal arena, we find a situation where Indian people are being discriminated against because their religion is not conventional. It's a minority religion.
The American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1978. Up until that time, our religion, our language, our right to be Indian, even growing long hair, was prohibited. And the basic reason was white people wanted to make Indians into white people. They looked down on us. They didn't understand our languages. They didn't understand our way of life. And they thought that we would be better off being white people. And that was probably the greatest mistake to the Indian people. We have suffered the lack of self-esteem, the lack of hope, the lack of identity in ourselves. And it's difficult to be an Indian, because part of being Indian says you have to be humble, you have to be generous, you have to be patient. It's very difficult to remain patient when you know the issues that are facing your people. You know what cultural genocide is, and you see the effects of cultural genocide. The decisions we make today are going to affect the next 7 generations. They're going to look back on us the same way we look back to our ancestors who signed and negotiated this 1868 treaty. Someday, some great-grandchild of mine is going to say, my great-grandfather was steadfast in his right to the Black Hills. He told the federal government, he and the Lakota people of his generation told the federal government these lands are not for sale at any price. They are holy lands, and what our duty to our great-grandchildren is going to be is to teach them why it's sacred. Why there are certain sites within the Black Hills that are sacred.
In June of 1983, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear the Indians' appeal to reverse the district court ruling. So the battle to legally remove the tourist facilities and to give the Indians unrestricted access to Bear Butte for their religious activities had failed. America is one of the richest countries in the free world, and yet how ironic that the descendants of the first inhabitants of this land, the Indian people, are economically the poorest and least privileged group among us. The U.S. Civil Rights Commission, in a 1983 report entitled Religion in the Constitution, A Delicate Balance, stated that despite the passage of the Religious Freedom Act, the federal government has failed in many instances to protect the religious freedom of the American Indian from government intrusion. Indian people feel that white society has often not understood or respected their rights as a sovereign people with separate cultures and their rights under the U.S. Constitution. In spite of this, many Indian nations and tribes survive and grow. Their struggle to protect and reclaim what they consider rightfully theirs continues.